The night my dad erased me. Happened on a cold Christmas evening in 2000. 23 in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. In the same living room where I had opened presents as a child and learned very early how to take up as little space as possible. I was standing near the edge of the room with a paper cup of mulled wine, warming my palms, listening to Bing Crosby drift softly from hidden speakers, watching nearly 200 people fill my parents' house with laughter and perfume and polite conversation. Church friends, distant cousins, my dad's business contacts, people who had known our family for decades and still believed we were something worth admiring. I am Vanessa. I was 32 years old that night. I worked as a cybersecurity analyst supporting the United States Army. Not combat, not glory, just long hours secured systems' quiet responsibility. To my dad, it was invisible work. To me, it had been survival. The house looked like something out of a holiday magazine. White lights wrapped around the banister. A massive tree glowing in the corner ornaments collected over 40 years. Mom had spent weeks planning the party, polishing silverware, rehearsing smiles. The smell of ham and cinnamon and pine filled the air. Everywhere I looked, people were congratulating my older sister Camille, touching her arm, leaning in close, smiling like she had just crossed some invisible finish line. Camille stood near the fireplace in a fitted green dress, her hair perfectly curled, accepting praise with the ease of someone who had practiced for this moment her entire life. People kept saying how proud my parents must be now that she was stepping into the legal world. No one mentioned that she had been in law school for years longer than planned. No one mentioned the failed exams or the temporary nature of her new position. None of that mattered. What mattered was the title, the story, the appearance. Dad was in his element. He moved through the crowd like a host and a judge all at once, laughing loudly, clapping people on the back, telling the same story over and over about Camille's bright future and the sacrifices our family had made to get her there. Every time he said our family, his eyes slid past me like I was part of the furniture. Before I go any further, let me ask you something. What are you doing right now while you listen to this? Are you folding? Laundry. Sitting in traffic. Drinking your morning coffee. That night I was standing in my childhood home, surrounded by people who loved the version of my family that never included me, and I had no idea that in a few minutes everything would fracture. Dad eventually tapped his glass with a spoon, the sharp clink cutting through the chatter. The room quieted. People turned toward him, smiling expectant. Mom stepped beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Camille moved closer, glowing. He cleared his throat and launched into a speech about family values, about legacy, about how important it was to invest in the right future. He talked about sacrifice. He talked about pride. He talked about how Camille was proof that dedication paid off. Heads nodded. Someone wiped away a tear. I stared at the pattern in the rug and counted my breaths. When the applause faded, his eyes finally found me. He gestured for me to come closer. Not loudly, just enough that the people nearest us could hear. I walked over, already feeling that familiar tightening in my chest, the warning sign I had learned to ignore years ago. He leaned in and lowered his voice, though not enough. He told me that now was the perfect time to show my support for my sister. He said family steps up when it matters. Then he explained that he and Mom had been talking, and they believed the right gift for Camille would be a new car, something reliable, something that reflected her status. He reminded me of the money I had been sending home for years, the savings Mom was holding on to. He said it was time I used it properly. I remember how calm I felt at that moment. Not numb, calm. I told him quietly that I was not going to do that. I said I had plans for that money. I said Camille was an adult and could celebrate her achievement without my savings. The air shifted. He straightened his jaw, tightening. His voice rose. He said I always had excuses. He said I never understood how the real world worked. Then he said it, right there in front of God and the Christmas tree and half the town. He said only useless people joined the military, that if I had any real ambition, I would have chosen a better path. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Someone laughed, thinking it was a joke. I did not respond. I simply stood there, meeting his eyes. That was when he went for the kill. He said he and Mom wished I had never been born. The room froze. I can still see it. A woman near the kitchen stopped mid-sip, Someone dropped a napkin. The music kept playing, cheerful and wrong. Camille stared at the floor. Mom said nothing. Her hand stayed on his arm. I did not cry. I did not argue. I smiled. Not wide, just enough. I took a step back. I said slowly, clearly, that they should consider me dead. Then I turned and walked toward the door. No one stopped me. No one called my name. I grabbed my coat from the rack, felt the cold night air hit my face, and stepped outside without looking back. The door closed behind me, muting the music, sealing the moment. I sat in my car for a long time, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching the house glow through the windshield. That was not a reaction. It was a decision. And it was the moment I stopped being the daughter who paid and stayed quiet. I did not know yet what would come next. I only knew that something had ended, and I was not going to carry it with me anymore. But endings do not exist without beginnings. And as I drove away from that house, my mind kept pulling me back to the year everything quietly shifted. 2016. That was the year I stopped trying to explain myself and started trying to survive. Ada was 25 then, standing in a beige office in a federal building in Maryland, holding a manila folder with my name on it. Vanessa Brooks, cybersecurity analyst, support assignment, United States Army. The job title did not sound impressive to most people. There was no uniform with medals, no dramatic deployment stories, no pictures worth framing. It was long days staring at screens tracking threats no one ever saw, making sure systems stayed standing so other people could sleep at night. To me, it felt steady, honest, earned. To my dad, it felt like failure. I remember calling home after I got the assignment. I was sitting on the edge of a narrow bed in my first apartment, the walls still bare, my phone pressed to my ear. I told him I had been placed with Army Cyber Command. I told him I would be working in support, not combat. I tried to sound proud. He went quiet for a second, then let out a short laugh. He said that was not real military. He said anyone could sit behind a computer. He said if I had any ambition, I would have done something people respected. I remember gripping the phone harder, staring at the carpet, telling myself it was just his way. That was the excuse I always used. It was just his way. Mom came on the line after. She asked if I was safe. She asked if I was eating enough. Then she asked about money. She said it would help if I sent a little home just until things settled. Camille was still in school. Tuition was high. There were expenses. I said yes without hesitation. That became the pattern. Every month a transfer. Sometimes more than I should have sent. Sometimes money I had planned to save. My base pay. My bonuses. Even a portion of what I earned during deployment support rotations. Mom said she was keeping it safe for me. She said it was better that way. I believed her. Or maybe I wanted to. Back then I still thought family meant shared sacrifice. I did not yet understand that I was the only one sacrificing. Camille was already the center of everything by then. She had started law school with confidence and left it in pieces. Years stretched on. Classes repeated. Exams failed. None of it seemed to matter at home. Every setback was someone else's fault. The testing board was unfair. The professors were biased. The system was broken. He repeated those explanations like facts. Whenever someone asked how his daughters were doing, his voice changed depending on which name he said first. With Camille, his shoulders straightened. His words grew polished. He talked about her future in law, about how hard she worked, about how proud he was. With me, if he remembered at all, he said I worked with computers. Or he said I was in the military. No detail. No pride. Just enough information to move on. I noticed it everywhere. At church. At family gatherings. At dinners with his friends. Camille was the promise. I was the afterthought. There was a Thanksgiving a few years after I joined the Army that stayed with me. He was carving the turkey while people crowded the kitchen. Someone asked what I was doing now. Before I could answer, he waved his knife slightly and said, "She's still doing that computer thing." Then he turned back to Camille and asked about her classes, her professors, her plans. I stood there holding a dish towel, feeling myself shrink. I did not speak up. I never did. That was the role I learned to play. The quiet one. The reliable one. The one who sent money and kept opinions to herself. I told myself it was maturity. I told myself it was love. I told myself one day it would balance out. When Camille failed the bar exam the first time I was the one who called her. I told her it did not define her. I told her she would try again. He barely spoke to me that week, but I still sent money. When she failed again, Mom cried on the phone and said it was such a hard season for the family. I sent more. No one ever asked what season I was in. There were nights in my apartment when I counted my remaining balance and wondered if I was being foolish. Then I pictured Mom's voice telling me it was safer with her. I pictured her saying family comes first. I convinced myself that loyalty meant endurance. The truth was simpler and harder. I was paying to belong. I see that now, but back then I did not question it. I told myself that my job was quiet, because it was meant to be. That my contribution was invisible because that was how systems worked. You only noticed them when they failed. He noticed only failure. He never came out and said it until that Christmas night, but the message had been there all along. My work was not worth celebrating. My effort did not deserve acknowledgement. My existence was acceptable only as long as it was useful. The more I gave, the less I was seen. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. The way decisions were made without asking me. The way plans were announced after the fact. The way my money was discussed as family money, while my opinions were treated as optional. I mistook obligation for love. I thought being needed meant being valued. That night in 2023 did not change my life. It revealed it. It showed me the truth I had been avoiding since 2016, that I had confused duty with belonging, that I had stayed quiet because it was easier than facing what speaking up might cost me. As I drove through the dark streets away from my parents' house, snow began to fall lightly against my windshield. I understood something I had never allowed myself to say out loud. I had not been a daughter in that family. I had been a resource. And resources once drained are expected to refill themselves. That realization stayed with me as I drove toward my apartment that night. The snow getting heavier, the roads quieter than usual. I remember gripping the steering wheel, feeling a strange mix of relief and grief coming and going in waves. It is a strange feeling when the story you have been telling yourself for years suddenly stops fitting. It is like finding out you have been walking with a limp you never noticed, until someone points it out. You cannot unfeel it once you know it is there. My phone buzzed in the console beside me. I did not look, but I already knew the pattern. Mom first, her voice tight with worry, but never directed at the right things. Then Camille delivering whatever message was safest for her at the moment. Then Dad last, ready to reframe whatever had happened so he could stay the hero of his own story. I turned the phone face down and let it ring until the sound blended with the hum of the heater. There was a time when I would have answered, when I would have apologized for making him uncomfortable, when I would have said things like, "It came out wrong," or "I understand why you said it," or "I should have been more patient." I had spent years polishing those sentences until they sounded almost believable. But something in me had shifted in that living room, right in front of the Christmas tree and the crowd and the lights. It was not rage, it was recognition. I realized I had been trying to earn a place that had never been promised to me in the first place. Back in 2016, when I first started sending money home, I did it with a warm heart. I imagined Mom putting it aside for me. I imagined Dad bragging about my discipline to someone. I imagined Camille saying thank you even once. Instead, it became expected, ordinary. A silent rule no one had to speak aloud because I had already agreed to it. Without realizing, when I returned home during the first winter, Mom hugged me with the same soft smile she always had. But she did not mention the money. Dad asked how long I was staying, not how I was doing. Camille asked if I could help her with some application fees. I remember thinking that was just how families operated. Someone always needed something. Someone always gave. I did not know yet that I was the only one trading pieces of my future away. The longer I stayed in the Army, the more it became clear that other people saw value in what I did, even if my own family did not. Officers thanked me for catching vulnerabilities. Colleagues relied on my judgment. There were days I finished a shift knowing that something I caught had protected real people. But when I shared any of that at home, Dad would tilt his head like I was speaking a foreign language and say, "It must be nice not having a real job." Little cuts, small comments, dismissive laughs. They added up, carving out something unsteady inside me. But saying yes over and over again had turned me into someone I barely recognized. Someone quiet, someone careful, someone who lived inside the lines he had drawn. I kept hoping the balance would shift eventually, that at some point they would see me differently, maybe even appreciate me, maybe even love me the way they loved Camille. That hope kept me in place longer than loyalty ever did. That night outside their house when Dad said, "What wished I were never born," it did not break me. It clarified me. It showed me that I had been trying to earn something that was never mine to earn. I thought back to every paycheck I had sent, every silence I had kept, every moment I had shrunk myself to make others comfortable. And for the first time, it felt like the story I had been living had quietly ended long before. Christmas night. I had simply refused to read the last page. As I got out of the car and walked toward my building, I understood one thing with absolute certainty. What I had been calling family was not family at all. It was an obligation dressed up as love, and I had been too afraid to see the difference. That realization did not comfort me, but it steadied me. It gave shape to the emptiness and made it something I could finally name. It was the first step towards something I had never allowed myself before. A life that did not revolve around being useful to people who never bothered to ask who I was. That thought stayed with me the next morning when I woke up in a quiet apartment with no obligations pulling at me. The sky outside my window was a flat winter gray, the kind that makes the whole world feel paused. For the first time in years, there were no messages I felt pressured to answer, no family schedule I had to rearrange myself around. There was only silence, heavy, unfamiliar, but mine. I reached for my phone out of habit. Notifications crowded the screen like flies. Missed calls, voicemails, a string of texts. The sight of them made something in my stomach twist and tighten. Not fear exactly. More like the memory of fear. The old instinct to smooth things over, to go back, to explain myself until everyone else felt comfortable again. I put the phone face down and sat on the edge of the bed, breathing slowly. I knew what I had to do. Not out of anger, not out of punishment, out of survival. I opened my contacts and blocked him first. His number disappeared with a quiet click. Then Mom, Camille, aunts, uncles, cousins. Each name vanished like a light turning off in a long hallway. I thought it would feel dramatic or reckless, but it did not. It felt like sweeping dust out of a room that had needed cleaning for years. When the last number left the screen, I waited for the rush of guilt I expected to hit. It did not come. What came instead was a soft stillness, like the air after snowfall. I sat with it, letting the quiet settle into my bones. The voicemail icon blinked at me, refusing to disappear. I tapped it. Mom's voice spilled out first. Her tone was tight, trembling with practiced disappointment. She asked what had gotten into me. She said the things Dad said were harsh, but I had to understand that he did not mean them literally. She said I should come back to the house so we could talk privately like adults. Then after a pause, she reminded me that I had embarrassed them in front of so many guests. Her voice carried that familiar mixture of worry and accusation, as if her concern only existed if I agreed I had done something wrong. I deleted the message. The next voicemail was shorter. Camille, her voice clipped and irritated. She said I had overreacted. She said everyone was stressed. She said Dad had just been drinking and trying to make a point. Then she said something that made me sit still for a long moment. She said I had ruined her celebration, her big night, her moment, as if my existence had stolen something from her. I deleted that message too. I did not listen to the rest. By noon, my phone had gone quiet, as if the world on the other end had realized that I was no longer participating. I made coffee. I sat on the couch and stared out the window at the parking lot below, watching someone scrape frost off their windshield. It was such an ordinary sight, but it grounded me. It reminded me of how small the world really was once I stepped outside the orbit of my family. The silence stretched through the day. It followed me as I folded laundry, answered work emails, and reheated leftover soup. It was not peaceful at first. It was sharp, almost echoing. Every time I moved from one room to another, I heard the absence of someone asking for something. The absence of someone reminding me what I owed. In the afternoon, my phone buzzed with a single text. Not from my family. From a number I did not recognize. For a moment, my heart jumped. But when I opened it, I saw a familiar tone woven through the words. It was a cousin I had not spoken to in months. She wrote that Mom was telling relatives I had had an episode, that he was furious, that the entire family was confused about why I had left early. She asked me to call her. I blocked the number without replying. It surprised me how easy it was, not because I did not care, but because I finally realized caring had never been mutual. I had poured years into people who only reached for me when they wanted something to fill a space they did not want to fill themselves. Around sunset, I went for a walk around the apartment complex. The air was crisp, and the last light of the day reflected off the snow piled along the sidewalks. Children were building a lopsided snowman near the entrance, laughing without restraint. A man in a heavy coat walked his dog behind them. Simple scenes, uncomplicated, no expectations attached. With each step, the tightness in my chest loosened a little more. It was startling to realize how little of my life I had ever lived for myself. How many decisions had been shaped by avoiding conflict? How many choices had been filtered through what would keep the peace? How often I had silenced my own voice before anyone else had the chance. Silence had always felt like surrender when I was younger. A way to avoid setting off Dad's temper. A way to keep Mom from crying. A way to keep Camille from complaining. But standing there under the streetlight with my breath forming clouds in the air, I understood something new. Silence could also be a wall, a boundary, a choice. My phone vibrated again when I got back inside. I did not check it. I put it in a drawer, closed it, and let the drawer stay shut. That night, as I got into bed, I lay still in the dark, listening to nothing but the hum of the heating vent. No arguing voices, no guilt-laden messages, no demands disguised as concern, just quiet. A deep, steady quiet that felt strange and comforting at the same time. I closed my eyes and let the silence wrap around me like a blanket. For the first time in a long time, I was not afraid of what it meant. I was not running from it. I was choosing it. And maybe that was the first real act of defiance in my entire life. Because silence, when it is chosen, is not emptiness. It is permission. It is the space where truth finally has room to breathe. And lying there in the dark, I finally understood that my silence was not a retreat from my family. It was the line I had drawn to protect what was left of myself. But drawing a line does not mean you immediately know how to live on the other side of it. The next morning, the silence felt different. Not frightening, but unfamiliar. Like stepping into a room I had never been allowed to enter. I made coffee and stood by the window watching the steam rise from the mug. The world was quiet outside. Snow covered the sidewalks in smooth, untouched layers. It reminded me of how easily things can look peaceful on the surface when no one has walked through yet. Later that day, I drove to a small grocery store down the street. The mundane act of pushing a cart through narrow aisles soothed me more than I expected. No one there knew anything about me. No one had opinions about my choices. No one judged or compared me to someone else. I picked up bread soup and a bag of oranges. Ordinary things for an ordinary life. Something I had rarely been allowed to experience without someone else's. Expectations pressing on my shoulders. When I reached the checkout, the cashier, an older woman with gentle eyes, asked if I was having a good holiday season. I paused. It struck me how simple the question was and how difficult it felt to answer. I smiled and said I was doing all right. For the first time in a long time, the words were not a lie. Driving back to my apartment, I felt a sort of quiet clarity begin to settle. It was not happiness, and it was not relief. It was recognition, the kind that comes only after you stop running from the truth. I had spent so many years trying to earn a place in a family that never made room for me. My silence had always been a tool for them, a way to keep me compliant. But now, for the first time, it belonged to me. That quiet certainty stayed with me through the next few days. Even as life tried to pull me back into the old patterns, I kept my phone off most of the time and focused on work, on cooking simple meals, on taking walks in the cold air. I tried not to think about what might be happening inside my parents' house. I tried not to imagine the conversations I knew they were having, the ones filled with denial and outrage and dramatic retellings that painted me as the problem. But avoiding thoughts does not stop real consequences, and those consequences began to surface faster than I expected. The first sign came on a Wednesday afternoon. I had stepped into the break room at the office building where my unit worked. I was heating leftover pasta in the microwave when two coworkers walked in. They fell silent the second they saw me, not in a rude or suspicious way, but in the way people go quiet when they are not sure what they are allowed to say. One of them asked me how my holiday had been. Her smile looked a little too careful. I answered politely and left the room with my food still steaming. On my way back to my desk, I passed by one of the civilian contractors. He gave me a sympathetic look, the kind I had never seen directed at me before. It felt like a warning bell in my chest, but I pushed it aside. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe it was nothing. It was not nothing. Late that afternoon, my phone lit up with a series of missed calls from numbers I did not know. I ignored them. Then a text came through from a cousin I had not spoken to since summer. The message was brief and tense. She said my dad had been telling relatives that I had suffered some kind of emotional break. She said Mom had cried at church and asked people to pray for my mental stability. She said Camille had told a few family friends that I had stormed out like someone unhinged. The word unhinged sat on the screen like a bruise. I put the phone down and stared at my desk. It was one thing for them to be angry. It was another thing for them to rewrite the story in a way that harmed me. Professionally. Army work, even support work, depends on trust and stability. Rumors are not harmless. They follow you, cling to your reputation, color the way people see you, even if they never say it out loud. I told myself not to react yet. Silence was still my boundary. But boundaries only protect you if the other side stays put. My family had no intention of doing that. 2 days later, the second blow arrived. I was stepping out of the building after a long shift when I noticed a familiar figure standing near the parking lot entrance. He was wearing a heavy coat and a knit hat, but the posture was unmistakable. Shoulders squared, chin raised, impatience radiating from his stance like heat off asphalt. My dad. My stomach dropped. I considered turning around, pretending I had forgotten something inside, but he had already seen me. He started walking toward me with that purposeful stride he used when he wanted the upper hand. I kept my voice even when I greeted him. He did not greet me back. Instead, he said he had come to talk some sense into me. He said I had embarrassed the family. He said people were talking. He said I needed to stop acting like a child and apologize. I listened without responding. He grew agitated. He said my coworkers deserved to know I was unstable before I caused problems. He said someone needed to warn them. His words pushed through the cold wind and hit me like ice water. That was the moment I realized why my coworkers had looked at me strangely. He had already talked to someone, maybe not directly, maybe not bluntly, but in his typical way of dropping hints and letting people assume the worst. I stood there in the parking lot while cars pulled out behind us, headlights reflecting off the wet asphalt. My dad shook his head at me, as if he were disappointed in the mess he believed I had created. Not once did he mention the words he had said to me on Christmas night. Not once did he question his own role in any of this. He acted as if I had simply malfunctioned, and he had shown up to reset me. When he finally walked away, the cold felt sharper than before. I sat in my car and let the heater run without pulling out of the space. My hands were shaking in a way I did not like. That was not fear, that was clarity. Silence had protected me emotionally, but it was not protecting my name. If I kept doing nothing, the damage would grow roots. The third blow arrived quietly the next morning. A message from Caleb, a younger cousin who had always been more observant than people realized. He said he knew things were messy right now, but he had something I might need. He asked if I wanted to hear it. I hesitated before replying with a simple yes. He sent a voice recording. The audio was grainy, like it had been recorded in a kitchen with dishes clinking in the background. At first I heard only muffled conversation, then my mom's voice, tight and tired. She said she was done trying with me. She said I had always been difficult. Then Camille chimed in, complaining that I had ruined her celebration. She said I had a jealous streak. Then Dad spoke louder than anyone else, declaring that if they had stopped at one child, they would all be better off. He said I had been a burden since the day I was born. He said sending me into the military had been their best chance to straighten me out. I listened to the recording 3 times, not because I needed to, but because I needed to accept that I was not imagining the harm. It was real, documented, spoken freely when they believed no one was listening. Caleb sent another message after. He said he did not know what I wanted to do, but he thought I deserved to know what was being said behind my back. He said he was sorry. I thanked him and told him to delete the recording from his phone for his own safety. I saved a copy to mine and locked it behind a password. That truth stayed with me through the weekend, sitting like a weight in the center of my chest. I moved through my apartment in slow circles, trying to decide what to do next. I washed dishes already clean. I folded laundry that did not need folding. I told myself to calm down, but calm was not the issue. The issue was direction. For the first time in my life, I was not reacting emotionally. I was reacting strategically. On Monday morning, I woke before the alarm. The sky was still dark outside, the kind of winter darkness that makes everything look muted and far away. I made coffee and stood in the quiet kitchen drinking it slowly. Then I got dressed and drove to the base earlier than usual. I parked and sat in my car for a few minutes, thinking through every step of what I was about to do. Then I headed toward the Judge Advocate General office. The JAG building was tucked behind the administrative wing, a square structure with glass doors and a lobby that always smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant. I had only been inside a handful of times for standard briefings, but never for anything personal. Walking in felt like crossing another line I had once believed I was not allowed to cross. A young specialist at the front desk looked up and asked if I needed assistance. I told her I needed to speak with an attorney regarding a personal matter that was beginning to interfere with my professional standing. My voice sounded steadier than I expected. She nodded and typed something into her computer, then directed me to a small waiting area with beige chairs and a row of framed certificates on the wall. I sat down and clasped my hands together. This was not revenge. It was not punishment. It was protection. It was the first time I was choosing an action not based on what my family might think or how they might react, but based on what I needed to preserve my life. After a short wait, a captain stepped into the lobby and called my name. She led me to her office and motioned for me to sit. Her desk was neat, just a stack of files, a legal pad, and a cup of pens arranged in a straight line. She asked me to explain the situation. I started slowly describing the events at the Christmas party, the words my dad had said in front of nearly 200 guests, the rumors my family had begun spreading, and the incident where my dad had shown up at my workplace. I kept my voice even factual. She took notes without interrupting. Then I mentioned the recording from Caleb. Her pen paused. She asked if I had a copy. I told her yes. She nodded and told me not to play it in the office, but to confirm its contents. When I did, she listened carefully, her expression sharpening in the way attorneys do when facts begin to form a line instead of scattered dots. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and looked at me for a long moment. She said this was serious. She said reputation attacks, workplace interference, and unfounded claims of mental instability could jeopardize not only my career, but also my clearance. She asked what outcome I wanted. The question surprised me. No one in my family had ever asked what I wanted. It took a moment before I could answer. I said I wanted them to stop. I wanted the rumors to end. I wanted my dad to never show up at my workplace again. I wanted to protect my name without escalating to something that would drag the entire situation into public view. I said I did not want revenge. I wanted distance and safety. She nodded again, this time with understanding. She said the simplest and strongest path was a cease and desist. She said her office could draft a letter outlining the legal consequences of continued harassment, workplace interference, and defamation. She said this letter would not be loud or dramatic. It would be official, professional, and effective. I felt something shift inside me as I listened. For years, I had allowed emotions to dictate my behavior because I did not want to make things worse. But the law does not care about guilt or shame or family roles. It cares about facts, boundaries, and actions. She asked if I wanted the letter addressed only to my dad or to the household. I paused. Then I said the household, because silence had taught me that the damage was not coming from one person. It was coming from a system I had lived inside all my life. The captain said she would draft the document and have it ready by the next day. She explained that I would need to sign a statement confirming the accuracy of my claims. She said she would send the letter by certified mail and email, and she would require written acknowledgement of receipt. She explained each step clearly without judgment, without raising an eyebrow at the idea of a daughter protecting herself from her own parents. When I left her office, the air outside felt different. Not lighter, not heavier, but sharper, as if the world had edges again. And I could finally feel them instead of dulling myself to keep peace that never existed. I drove home and waited. By the next afternoon, the letter was ready. The captain sent me a copy. It was concise and formal. It stated that continued harassment, defamation rumors spreading, or workplace interference would result in further action. It prohibited my dad from appearing at my place of work. It documented the known incidents. It outlined consequences for failure to comply. Reading it, I felt an unexpected rush of steadiness. For the first time, I had something bigger than my voice speaking on my behalf. The system I worked for, the institution my dad had belittled, was now the shield between us. The letter was sent. A few hours later, I saw the notifications appear on my phone. Delivery confirmed. Email received. Then nothing. No calls, no messages. No hysterical voicemails, no accusations, just silence. But this time it was not the silence of avoidance or denial. It was the silence that follows being told no by something bigger than yourself. That evening I sat on my couch with a blanket draped over my lap, the television on low volume but barely registering in my mind. I thought about the letter traveling through the system, landing squarely in my parents' inbox, disrupting the narrative they had tried to construct about me. I imagined Dad reading it, realizing that the daughter he called useless had just used the military he mocked to draw an unbreakable line. I imagined Mom sitting beside him, realizing that their words were no longer private weapons but documented facts. But imagining their reactions did not bring me satisfaction. Instead, it brought clarity. I understood finally that boundaries do not require understanding to be valid. They do not require agreement or apology or emotional reconciliation. They only require enforcement. For years, I had believed that if I explained myself well enough, if I loved hard enough, if I sacrificed long enough, then eventually they would respect me. It had never occurred to me that respect does not grow from explanation. It grows from consequences. As I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, the apartment felt steady under my feet. I breathed in the quiet and let it settle in my chest like something earned. I no longer needed them to understand my boundaries. I believed that, and for a few days it seemed like the world agreed. Work settled back into its usual rhythm. My inbox stayed clean. No one looked at me with that careful sympathy anymore. My name felt like my own again, not a rumor passing from mouth to mouth. I let myself breathe. The kind of slow breath that reaches all the way down into your ribs. Then, on a gray morning in early January of 2024, my supervisor sent me a short message asking me to stop by his office when I had a moment. The request was polite, ordinary. The kind of thing that usually meant a schedule update or a new tasking. Still, my stomach tightened as I walked down the hallway. It was not panic. It was instinct. The old part of me that expected consequences whenever I stood up for myself. His office was small and tidy, the blinds half open, the light outside thin and washed out. Colonel Whitaker was there too, standing near the window with his hands clasped behind his back. He was taller than my supervisor, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who carried authority without raising his voice. I had seen him in meetings and briefings, always calm, always precise. He was not someone you casually surprised. My supervisor motioned for me to sit. I sat back straight, hands resting on my knees like I was being evaluated. Colonel Whitaker turned from the window and looked at me with a steady expression that did not lean toward kindness or harshness. It leaned toward truth. He asked me if I was doing all right. I said yes. He asked me if anything outside of work had been causing stress that could affect my performance. I answered carefully. I told him I had dealt with a family situation over the holidays, but it was contained. I told him I had taken steps to protect my personal boundaries and that it would not interfere with my duties. He nodded once slow. Then he said something that made my throat go dry. He said that information had reached the unit suggesting I was unstable, that I had experienced some kind of breakdown, and that there were concerns about my reliability. He said that kind of noise does not usually rise high enough to touch our office, but when it does, it has to be addressed. Not because the Army is interested in gossip, but because security work is built on trust. I swallowed. I told him it was not true. I told him I had never been evaluated for any condition that would impair me. I told him the story was being spread by family members who were angry that I had cut contact. Colonel Whitaker listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said he believed me. The words landed like a hand on my shoulder. Firm, grounding. Then he said he still had to follow the process. He explained that when outside parties attempt to discredit a service member, especially someone working in cyber, the unit has to confirm there is no real risk, because the work we do does not forgive assumptions. He said the security team had already opened a quiet inquiry, not into my mental health but into the source of the rumor. He said the questions were simple. Who was spreading it? What exactly were they saying? Were they trying to interfere with my employment or access? Were they attempting to contact people in my workplace? I felt heat rise. Behind my eyes, not from sadness, but from something colder. Anger, yes, but also a deep disgust that my dad had pushed it this far. He had not just insulted me, he had reached into my professional life and tried to poison it because he could not control me. My supervisor asked if my dad had shown up at the building. I said yes in the parking lot. I kept my voice level as I explained. I said he had tried to talk to me. I said he had made comments about warning my coworkers. I said I had since pursued a formal cease and desist through legal channels. Colonel Whitaker asked if I had documentation. I told him I did. I offered the certified mail confirmations. I offered the audio recording from my cousin Caleb, the one that captured my dad and mom speaking freely. Colonel Whitaker held up a hand and said he did not need the recording unless legally requested it. He said he was not interested in family drama. He was interested in ensuring that no one could compromise me, not with threats, not with false narratives, not with harassment. The words hit me in a way I did not expect. For years I had been told I was weak, useless, less than. Now a senior officer was telling me in the plainest terms that my safety mattered because my role mattered. Not because I was perfect, not because I had performed some grand gesture, because I was part of a system that did not run on favoritism. It ran on standards. Colonel Whitaker asked one more question. He asked if any of my family members had attempted to use my name or status to gain access to something, a contact, a recommendation, a clearance, anything like that. I shook my head at first, then hesitated. I said I did not think so. Then I remembered something I had tried to ignore. Camille had mentioned in passing that her law firm might work with government clients someday. She had said it with a smug little smile, as if proximity to my world elevated hers. I had rolled my eyes and changed the subject. I told Colonel Whitaker about that comment, making it clear I had never offered help and never would. Colonel Whitaker did not react emotionally. He simply nodded and wrote a note. He said thank you. He said I could return to work. He said if anyone contacted me or showed up again, I should report it immediately. I left the office feeling shaky in a different way than before. Not fragile. Alert. Like a person who realizes the door they just locked has a second lock they never knew existed. For the next few days, nothing obvious happened. No new calls, no new messages. My dad stayed away. The silence held. I tried to let my nervous system settle, tried to tell myself that my boundaries were working. Then one afternoon, an unfamiliar email appeared in my work inbox from an internal address. It was brief, requesting that I confirm I had no involvement in any external parties seeking verification of military affiliation for professional purposes. The wording was so formal it felt unreal. I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I responded immediately, stating clearly that I had not requested any verification, had not given permission for anyone to use my affiliation, and had not provided any personal endorsement. I hit send and sat back, heart beating harder than it should have over a simple email. That night I called Caleb. I had not spoken to him since he sent the recording. I did not want to drag him into the mess any more than he already was. But something in my gut told me he might know what was happening inside that house. He answered on the second ring, voice low, like he was stepping outside to talk. He told me my dad was furious about the cease and desist. He said my dad had been ranting about how I thought I was better than them now. He said Mom had been crying on and off, not because she was sorry, but because she hated that people were talking. He said Camille had been snapping at everyone, blaming me for everything that was going wrong. I asked what else. Caleb hesitated, then said something that made my stomach drop. He said Camille had been telling people she worked as a lawyer, not a legal assistant, not a temporary trainee, a lawyer. He said she had been leaning on that story hard at church, at dinners, online. He said my dad loved it because it made the family look like winners. He said my dad had even hinted that my military role made the whole family Sound important like we had connections. I felt my jaw tighten. I had known Camille exaggerated. I had known my dad inflated stories when it suited him. But hearing it laid out so plainly made it sound uglier than I had allowed myself to admit. I asked Caleb if Camille's firm knew the truth about her status. He said he thought so. Then he added, almost reluctantly, that my dad had been talking about how close the family was to becoming something big. How Camille was on track. How they were finally getting the recognition they deserved. Caleb's voice went quiet for a moment. Then he said he had never heard my dad talk like that about me. Not once. After I hung up, I sat in the dark living room, my phone in my hand, staring at the reflection of the streetlights on the window. I felt something heavy in my chest, but it was not sadness. It was the familiar ache of being erased. Even now, even after everything, my dad could use my existence to decorate his story, but he could not bring himself to value me as a person. 2 days later, Colonel Whitaker asked to see me again. This time he met me in a conference room, not his office. The room was empty except for a table and a stack of folders. He told me to sit. He sat across from me, posture, straight eyes, calm. He said the inquiry had confirmed what I told them. The rumors about my instability were coming from outside sources, specifically connected to my family. He said that part was now documented, and it would not reflect negatively on me. Relief flooded through me so fast I had to blink hard. Then he said there was another piece. He said during the inquiry, the security office received an unrelated request for verification connected to a local law firm. He said the firm had been conducting internal checks because of reputational concerns. He did not say my sister's name at first. He simply said a trainee connected to my family had been representing herself in ways that did not match her actual status. My throat tightened again. I did not speak. I did not have to. Colonel Whitaker said he was not involved in the firm's decisions. He emphasized that. He said all he did was confirm that no one had authorization to use my affiliation, and that there were concerns about my family attempting to leverage my position. He said the firm, as part of its own risk management, had chosen to review the trainee's file and online presence. He said inconsistencies were found. He said the firm was taking action. I sat still, trying to process the words. My first instinct was fear. Not for Camille, for what this meant, for how it would be spun back onto me, for how my dad would respond. I pictured him roaring about betrayal, about sabotage, about my supposed mental instability. I pictured Mom's trembling voice. I pictured Camille's rage. Colonel Whitaker watched me quietly. He asked if I understood. I told him I did. My voice sounded flat in my own ears. He told me one more thing. He said I should be prepared for escalation at home. He said people who rely on control often react strongly when control is removed. He advised me to document any contact attempts and continue using proper channels. He reminded me that my job was to remain professional, steady, and protected. When the meeting ended, I walked back to my desk feeling numb and sharp at the same time. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel like I had won anything. I had not asked for this. I had not planned it. I had not even wanted Camille's life to implode. I wanted my family to stop lying about me. And yet truth has momentum. That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the heater and the distant sound of a neighbor's television through the wall. I thought about all the years my dad had mocked my work, called it useless, treated it like a lesser path. And now that same system, the one he dismissed, had quietly exposed the rot beneath his favorite story. I understood then that I could not control what truth touched once it was set in motion. I could only control what I chose to do with it. And as I drifted toward sleep, one thought settled in my mind with a strange, steady clarity. The truth does not need my permission to move forward. It has its own gravity. I learned that in the days that followed, not through dramatic phone calls or loud confrontations, but through the quiet way consequences seep into everyday life. Karma does not always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it shows up like a draft under a door, unnoticed until the whole room feels colder. I did not call Camille. I did not text Mom. I did not ask Caleb for updates. After that meeting with Colonel Whitaker, I made a decision that felt strange at first. I would not chase the fallout. I would not refresh my phone like a teenager waiting for gossip. I would not let their chaos become my entertainment. I had spent too many years being pulled into their storms. If the truth was moving forward on its own, I was going to keep walking in the opposite direction. That was harder than it sounds. When you grow up in a family where everything is everyone's business, silence feels unnatural. It feels like you are refusing to participate in the only language you were taught. But I kept reminding myself that my job was not to manage their emotions anymore. My job was to stay steady, to stay clean, to stay out of the mess they kept trying to drag me back into. Work helped. It always did. There is something grounding about a routine where people expect you to be competent, not compliant. I spent long hours in secure rooms with fluorescent lights and the soft clicking of keyboards all around me. I focused on alerts, logs, patterns, on the kind of invisible work that keeps systems from collapsing. I took lunch breaks without checking my personal phone. I answered messages from my supervisor, not my family. I went home and cooked dinner and watched old television shows that felt comforting and familiar. Then the first hint reached me anyway. It came from a woman at church. Not my parents' church, but a small congregation near my apartment where I sometimes attended when I had the energy. I did not go often, but that Sunday I went because I needed to sit somewhere quiet that did not feel like a base or a courtroom. I wore a simple sweater and jeans. I kept my head down, slipped into a pew near the back, and listened to hymns that reminded me of childhood before I understood what was happening inside my own house. After the service, a woman I barely knew approached me near the coffee table. She was in her 60s with kind eyes and a soft voice. She asked if I was doing all right. Her tone was gentle, but there was something careful in it, like she was choosing her words with extra attention. I told her I was fine. She nodded, then said she had heard some things about my family back in Ohio. She said it sounded complicated. She said she was sorry. My stomach tightened. I thanked her and said I appreciated it. Then I left with my coffee untouched. On the drive home, my mind spun through possibilities. People rarely say I heard some things unless the things are already spreading. Beyond the people involved, it meant my family's story, the one they had tried to control, was slipping into other spaces. It meant they were not just talking inside their home anymore. They were being talked about. That same afternoon, Caleb sent a message from a new number. He did not say hello. He did not ask if I had time. He just wrote that he thought I should know something. I stared at the screen for a long moment before I answered. I told him he could say it. He replied that Camille had lost her position at the law firm. I read that line twice. It did not bring me joy. It did not bring me satisfaction. It brought me a strange stillness, the kind that settles in your chest when a truth finally takes shape. Camille had built her identity on a story. Dad and Mom had built their pride on that same story. She was the future lawyer, the one who would make the family shine, the one who would carry the name into something people respected. Now the story has cracked, and cracks do not stay small. Caleb wrote again, adding that it happened quickly, that Camille had come home in tears and anger, slamming doors, screaming that I ruined her, that Dad paced through the kitchen yelling about betrayal, that Mom cried and kept saying she could not believe this was happening to them, not to me, not to the daughter he told he wished had never been born, to them. I did not respond right away. I set my phone down on the passenger seat and kept driving, hands steady on the wheel, eyes forward. I did not want to give Caleb the impression that I needed the details. I did not, but I did want him to understand one thing. I wrote back that I was sorry he was stuck in the middle. I told him to take care of himself. I told him he did not need to update me unless something affected my safety. He replied with a single word. Understood. The next week passed in small pieces. I worked, I slept. I did my grocery shopping. I took a walk when the air was warm enough to breathe without pain. And still the consequences kept echoing toward me. Not from my family directly, from the edges of their world. One morning, a coworker who knew I was from Ohio mentioned he had seen a post in a Paz community group online. He said it sounded like a family drama, something about a woman being pushed out after a fight at Christmas. He laughed lightly like it was harmless. I smiled politely and changed the subject. My heart beat a little faster, but I did not let it show. That was how karma worked sometimes. It did not just punish. It was exposed. It turned private cruelty into public discomfort. It made people who once enjoyed looking impressive now have to live inside the awkwardness of being known. Caleb messaged again 2 days later. He said the rumors in the local legal community were spreading fast. It was a small world there, a tight network of firms' assistants, clerks, and court staff who talked to each other constantly. He said Camille's name had become a cautionary whisper. He said the firm had not made a dramatic announcement, but people noticed when someone disappeared without explanation. People filled in the blanks with their own conclusions. I pictured Camille in her green dress by the fireplace basking in praise, acting like she had already arrived. I pictured Dad smiling wide, telling everyone about her future. I pictured Mom standing beside him, eyes shining with pride that never belonged to me. Then I pictured that same house weeks later, quieter, lights still on but the energy different. The kind of quiet that comes after people stop calling. Caleb wrote that their church friends were keeping distance, that people were being polite but cold. That invitation had slowed down. That Mom had missed a service and people noticed. That Dad was complaining about being judged. I did not respond with any comment about what they deserved. I did not respond at all. Not because I was trying to be cruel, but because every time I imagined stepping back into their story, I felt the old trap waiting. The old role. The fixer. The peacemaker. The daughter who absorbs everything and apologizes for bleeding. I had promised myself I would not return to that. One evening, as I sat on my couch with a bowl of soup balanced on my knee, I found myself staring at the wall and feeling something unexpected. Not guilt, no regret, something like emptiness. The kind that follows a major shift, even when the shift is necessary. I realized I had always believed consequences would feel dramatic, like a movie scene, like a loud slam of a door and a triumphant moment where the wronged person finally wins. But real life does not often give you that kind of clean satisfaction. Real life gives you silence and small updates and long stretches where you simply exist with the knowledge that your family is falling apart without you. I thought about that word, falling apart, and felt a hard truth rise in my throat. They were not falling apart because I left. They were falling apart because they had built their family on lies. They had built it on the idea that Camille's success mattered more than my dignity. They had built it on the belief that my money was theirs to assign. They had built it on the comfort of having a daughter who would swallow pain, quietly so they could keep smiling. When I stopped swallowing, the structure shook. A few days later, Caleb called instead of texting. I let it ring twice before I answered. His voice sounded tired. He said he was calling because he thought my dad might do something stupid. He said Dad was furious, blaming me for Camille's job loss, blaming the military, blaming everyone except himself. He said Dad kept saying he would fix it, that he would set people straight, that he would make sure everyone knew I was unstable. Hearing that made my shoulders tighten. Caleb said Mom was not helping. Mom was crying, saying she did not recognize her own life anymore, saying she was being shunned, saying she did not understand why people were so cold. Not once, Caleb said, did Mom mention the words Dad said to me at the Christmas party. Not once did she say they had gone too far. She spoke only about what was happening to her. I thanked Caleb for the warning and told him I had legal protection in place. I told him if my dad contacted me or showed up again, I would report it. Caleb exhaled and said he hated that it had come to this. I told him I did too, and I meant it. After the call ended, I sat in the quiet of my apartment and listened to the refrigerator hum. I felt the familiar tug of empathy, the part of me that still wanted to step in and make things better, even for people who had hurt me. That tug was a habit, not a virtue. I had to remind myself of that. Empathy without boundaries is just self-abandonment. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside the parking lot was calm. A woman carried groceries to her car. A teenager tossed a basketball at a hoop near the sidewalk. Ordinary life continued. Inside my chest, I felt a strange steadiness settle again. A calm that did not depend on my family's approval or understanding. A calm that came from the knowledge that I was no longer participating in the story they wrote about me. Karma was moving through their lives, and not as a loud punishment, but as a slow turning of the world. Doors closing, invitations drying up, people looking away. The kind of consequences that hurt people who care more about reputation than relationships. And for the first time, I did not feel responsible for managing the fallout. I understood something simple and difficult. Karma does not yell. It does not need an audience. It does not need me to direct it. It just arrives quietly. and lets people live inside the truth they tried so hard to bury. I thought that would be the end of it. Not a neat ending, not a satisfying one, but an ending all the same. The kind where the noise fades, and everyone is left with whatever they built. I told myself I was done expecting anything from them. I told myself that silence was not only my boundary, but my freedom. Then the apologies started. They did not come all at once. They did not come loudly. They came the way everything else in my family always had, out of sequence and too late. The first message came from Camille. It arrived late at night, close to 11, when the apartment was quiet, and the only light in my living room came from the lamp beside the couch. I had just finished washing a mug and setting it in the rack when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen without thinking, then froze when I saw her name. I stared at it for a long moment. My thumb hovered over the notification. Part of me wanted to delete it without reading. Another part, the older part, wanted to know what she had to say now that her world had cracked. I sat down slowly and opened the message. It was not long. No dramatic language, no accusations. Just words that felt heavier than I expected. She wrote that she was sorry. She wrote that she had been selfish and blind. She wrote that she had always known deep down that Dad favored her and that Mom allowed it, but that she had never thought about what that meant for me. She admitted that she had taken the money, the praise, the protection, without questioning where it came from. She admitted that she had laughed at things that should have stopped her cold. She wrote that losing her position had forced her to look at herself in a way she never had before. That sitting at home with no one calling, no one praising her, had stripped away the version of herself she had been performing. She wrote that she did not expect forgiveness. She wrote that she just wanted me to know she finally understood. I read it twice. I did not cry. I did not feel angry. What I felt was a strange stillness, like standing in the aftermath of a storm that had already moved on. Her words were sincere. I could feel that. They were not written to impress anyone. They were written by someone who had fallen and realized the ground was harder than she imagined. But sincerity does not undo years. I thought about all the moments she had stayed silent when he dismissed me. The times she smiled while I paid for things and she was praised for existing. The way she had rolled her eyes when I talked about my work, my life, my exhaustion. I thought about Christmas night, the green dress. The way she had looked almost bored as Dad spoke about my usefulness and then erased me with one sentence. I understood something then that I had not fully understood before. Apologies do not have to be fake to be insufficient. I typed my response carefully, not because I wanted to be kind, but because I wanted to be clear. I wrote that I wished her luck. That was it. No explanation, no reassurance, no reopening of doors. I hit send and placed the phone face down on the table. The next morning I woke up feeling lighter than I expected. Not relieved, not triumphant, just settled. I had not argued. I had not defended myself. I had not stepped back into the role of emotional caretaker. I had acknowledged her words without offering myself up as a solution. That mattered more than I realized. A week passed. Then a letter arrived. It was a physical letter-thick envelope, my address written in Mom's familiar looping handwriting. I recognized it instantly and felt my chest tighten, not with fear, but with annoyance. They had not called. They had not texted. They had chosen the one form of communication that demanded time and emotional labor. I left the envelope on the counter for 2 days. On the third evening after dinner, I sat down at the table and opened it. The letter was long, several pages. The paper smelled faintly like Mom's house, like detergent and something floral. I read it slowly, partly because it was dense, and partly because I wanted to notice what was being said and what was not. Mom wrote most of it. I could tell by the tone. Emotional, winding, full of explanations. She wrote that she never meant to hurt me, that everything they did was out of love, that families make mistakes. That Christmas had been stressful, that he did not mean what he said, that he had been overwhelmed and worried and misunderstood. She wrote that I had always been sensitive, that the military had changed me, that she worried about me, that she wished I would come home so they could talk like a family. He added a paragraph at the end. It was shorter, colder. He wrote that he was sorry if I felt hurt. He wrote that his words were taken out of context. He wrote that I had embarrassed the family by making things legal. He wrote that Camille was struggling and that I should consider the consequences of my choices. He wrote that he still expected better from me. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. I felt no urge to respond, not even to correct the record, because the letter was not an apology. It was a defense. It was an attempt to pull me back into the old dynamic, where my pain was negotiable and their intentions were sacred. It was an attempt to reframe what happened as a misunderstanding rather than a pattern. It was an attempt to make my reaction the problem instead of their behavior. I placed the envelope in a drawer and closed it. Days later, another message came, this time from Mom's email address. It was shorter than the letter, but it carried the same tone. She wrote that she missed me. She wrote that she did not understand why I was punishing them. She wrote that families forgive. She wrote that holding on to anger only hurts the person holding it. I read it once and archived it. I was not holding on to anger. I was holding on to clarity. There is a difference. The hardest part was not resisting the guilt. The hardest part was resisting the familiar pull to explain myself, to justify my silence, to make them see that I was not cruel, that I was not cold, that I was not punishing anyone. But that impulse came from the same place as everything else I had done for them. The belief that I needed to earn my right to exist without being harmed. I did not need that anymore. One afternoon, as I sat in my living room with a book open on my lap, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a missed call from a number I recognized but had not saved. Dad. I watched it ring until it stopped. I did not block the number. I did not feel the need. I trusted myself enough now to know I would not answer. That evening I went for a walk around my neighborhood. The sun was low, the air cool. Houses glowed softly from within. I passed couples walking dogs, kids riding bikes, an older man watering his lawn. Ordinary scenes. Peaceful scenes. I thought about how many times I had imagined this moment going differently. He apologized sincerely. Mom admitting she failed me. Camille standing up for me. A clean reconciliation where everyone learned and grew. That story had never been realistic. What I had instead was something quieter. A truth that settled into my bones. Some apologies are not meant to heal the person who was hurt. They are meant to save the person who speaks to them. They come not from accountability, but from discomfort. Not from empathy, but from fear of loss. They ask for absolution without offering repair. They want the pain to disappear so the mirror can be put away. I reached my apartment and unlocked the door. Inside it was warm, familiar, mine. I placed my keys on the table and leaned against the wall for a moment, letting the quiet surround me. I felt sadness, yes. Sadness for the family I never really had. Sadness for the versions of them that might have existed in another life. But I also felt something else, peace, the kind that comes when you stop mistaking words for change. I knew then that I would not answer any more apologies that asked me to disappear so others could feel better. And as I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, I understood something I had never been taught growing up. There are apologies that come too late. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let them stay that way. Life did not pause after that realization. It kept moving quietly but steadily, as life always does when you finally stop arguing with it. Weeks passed, then months. Winter softened into early spring, and the world outside my apartment window began to change in small, hopeful ways. Snow melted into patches of brown grass. Buds appeared on trees I had walked past 100 times without noticing. So much of my life had been spent surviving that I almost missed the moment when I started living. Mark noticed before I did. He had been part of my life for a while, long before Christmas, long before everything fell apart. He knew my family history in broad strokes, but not the details. I had always been careful not to bring that weight into our relationship. Not because I did not trust him, but because I was still learning how to carry it myself. Mark was steady in a way that did not demand attention. He listened more than he spoke. When I pulled away emotionally, he did not chase me. He simply stayed. When I set boundaries, he respected them without needing an explanation. That alone felt radical. One evening in late March, we were sitting on the couch eating takeout, our legs tangled together, the television playing softly in the background. He reached for my hand and held it longer than usual. I turned to look at him, expecting a question or a comment. Instead, he smiled, nervous in a way I had never seen before. He said he loved me. He said he loved the way I moved through the world, the way I stood my ground, the way I had rebuilt myself without becoming bitter. He said he did not want to wait any longer to say what he had been carrying. Then he reached into his pocket. The moment felt unreal. Not cinematic, not dramatic, just deeply human. My chest tightened, and for a split second the old fear tried to surface. The fear that good things were temporary. That happiness always came with conditions. Mark asked me to marry him. I did not hesitate. I said yes, and the word came out clear and strong, without doubt hiding behind it. When he slipped the ring onto my finger, something inside me shifted. Not because a ring changes who you are, but because I realized how far I had come from the girl who believed she was only valuable when she was useful. We did not tell many people right away. We sat with the news, letting it become ours before sharing it with the world. When we did announce it, we kept it simple. A photo of our hands together. A short caption. No explanations. The responses poured in. Friends, coworkers, people I had not spoken to in years. Messages of congratulations, excitement, warmth. I read them slowly, letting myself feel the support without shrinking from it. Then inevitably my family found out. The first message came from Mom. She wrote that she had heard the news and wanted to congratulate me. She wrote that she hoped this meant I was happy. She wrote that she would love to be involved to help plan, to make things right. I stared at the message for a long time. It was carefully worded, polite, almost gentle. But beneath it, I could still feel the familiar pull. The attempt to step back into my life now that there was something worth celebrating, something public, something they could attend. Dad followed a few days later. His message was shorter. He wrote that despite everything, families should be present for milestones. He wrote that weddings were about unity. He wrote that people would talk if they were not there. He wrote that I should think carefully before making a decision I could not undo. Reading his words, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not anger, not sadness, certainty. For the first time, I did not feel torn between what I wanted and what they expected. I did not feel the urge to explain myself. I did not feel the need to soften the truth so it would land better. I showed Mark the messages. He read them quietly, his jaw tightening slightly, then looked at me and asked a simple question. What do you want? No one had ever asked me that so plainly before. I thought about it. Not for long, but honestly. I thought about standing at an altar and seeing my dad in the front row. I thought about my mom's tight smile. I thought about Camille sitting there, a reminder of everything that had been taken and never returned. I thought about the weight that would settle into my chest the moment I saw them, the way my body would brace for impact even on a day meant to be joyful. Then I thought about walking toward Mark, about the life we were building, about the peace I had fought so hard to claim. I knew the answer. I wrote back. I did not write a speech. I did not list grievances. I did not revisit Christmas or money or cruelty. I wrote one sentence. I wrote that they would not be attending my wedding, that they were not invited into the life they once said should not exist. I pressed send. The silence that followed felt different than before, heavier but also cleaner, like closing a door that had been hanging open too long. Mom responded first, asking how I could be so cold. Dad followed with anger, accusing me of punishment, of cruelty, of tearing the family apart. He said I was proving everything he had ever said about me. I did not reply, because this time I was not reacting. I was choosing. I sat with Mark later that night, my head resting against his shoulder, his arm wrapped around me. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not tell me everything would be fine. He simply held me present and steady. That was family. Over the next weeks, we planned our wedding quietly. We chose a small venue, a guest list filled with people who knew us, who supported us, who had seen us grow. There were no dramatic conversations, no negotiations, no guilt-ridden compromises, just joy, simple, honest joy. As the date approached, I found myself reflecting on the person I used to be, the daughter who believed she was a backup plan, the one who paid, stayed quiet, waited for approval that never came, the one who thought endurance was the same as love. That role no longer belonged to me. I was not a placeholder. I was not a spare. I was not mistaken. I was a woman building a life with someone who chose me without conditions, someone who did not need me to disappear in order to feel important. One evening, as I slipped the engagement ring off to clean it, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I looked older than I had a year ago, but stronger, softer in some places, sharper in others. I smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because for the first time, I was not waiting to be allowed into my own life. I had ended the role they wrote for me, and I was finally free to write my own. The months leading up to the wedding passed faster than I expected. Not in a blur of chaos or stress, but in a steady rhythm that felt almost unreal after everything I had lived through. I woke up most mornings without the familiar knot in my chest. I drank my coffee slowly. I planned my days without bracing for interruption. There was a quiet confidence growing inside me, the kind that does not announce itself but changes the way you stand, the way you speak, the way you breathe. I thought often about my family during that time, but not in the way I used to. I did not replay arguments or imagine alternative endings. I did not draft messages in my head or rehearse conversations that would never happen. Instead, I looked at the story as a whole, like stepping back from a painting to finally see what the artist was doing all along. For years, I had believed I was the problem, that if I could just be less sensitive, less tired, less stubborn, everything would fall into place. I believed my role was to absorb discomfort so others could feel comfortable. I believed that love was proven by how much you were willing to endure without complaint. That belief did not come from nowhere. It was taught to me slowly and consistently by the people who were supposed to protect me. My dad used to say that the military was for people who could not make it anywhere else. He said it casually, like a joke. But his eyes were always serious when he looked at me. My mom never contradicted him. She just smiled tightly and changed the subject, as if silence could soften cruelty. Camille learned early that praise came easily if she fit the picture they wanted to show the world. I learned that survival meant staying useful and invisible at the same time. When I finally stopped playing that role, everything unraveled. Not because I destroyed something good, but because what existed could not survive honesty. That realization settled deeper as the wedding approached. Mark and I chose a small ceremony on purpose, a quiet venue just outside town surrounded by trees and open sky. We invited friends, colleagues, people who had shown up for us without needing to be asked. There were no empty seats reserved for people who had made me feel small. There were no compromises disguised as forgiveness. On the morning of the rehearsal, I stood alone in the empty space, sunlight filtering through the windows, dust motes floating in the air. I placed my hand on the back of a chair and closed my eyes. For a moment, I let myself imagine what it would have felt like to walk down an aisle toward Yadin, people who once wished I had never been born. The thought no longer hurt. It felt distant, like remembering an old injury that had healed into a scar. Still visible, still part of you, but no longer defining your movement. That night, as I sat on the edge of the bed in our apartment, folding clothes into a small suitcase for the weekend, my phone buzzed. I knew who it was before I looked. Dad. I let it ring until it stopped. A few seconds later, a message came through. Short, direct. He wrote that he had heard the wedding was soon. He wrote that he wanted one last chance to talk. He wrote that life was too short to hold grudges. I read it once, then set the phone down. I was not holding a grudge. I was holding a boundary. And boundaries do not need to be defended to the people who taught you to. Violate them. I did not block him. I did not respond. I simply continued folding the clothes, placing each item carefully into the bag. It felt symbolic in a way I did not expect. Packing for a future that did not include the weight of the past. The wedding day itself was quiet and bright. The sky was clear, the air warm but not heavy. I stood with my closest friend as she adjusted the back of my dress, her hands steady, her smile wide. There was laughter nearby. Someone spilled coffee and swore softly. Someone else hummed a song under their breath. It felt normal, beautifully, wonderfully normal. When I walked toward Mark, my heart was full in a way I had never known. Not the kind of fullness that comes from approval or validation, but the kind that comes from alignment. From knowing that the life you are stepping into matches the person you have become. As we stood together, hands joined, I did not think about my dad or my mom or Camille. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who would have believed she did not deserve this moment. The one who would have worried about who was missing instead of who was present. I wished her peace. After the ceremony, as the evening settled in and conversations softened into laughter and shared, Stories I stepped away for a moment and stood at the edge of the space. I watched Mark talk with my coworkers. I watched my friends laugh with their whole bodies. I watched people who knew my story without judgment celebrate a future I had chosen. I felt something close to gratitude, not for what I endured, but for what I refused to endure any longer. Later that night, after the last guest had left and the lights were dimmed, Mark and I sat together in the quiet. My head rested against his shoulder, the sounds of the day still echoing softly in my mind. He asked me how I was feeling. I told him the truth. I told him I felt clear. Clear about who I was. Clear about what I deserved. Clear about what I would never accept again. In the weeks that followed, I heard bits and pieces about my family through distant channels. That my parents were still struggling socially. That Camille was working a job far removed from the image she once clung to. That my name was mentioned less and less. None of it stirred anything dramatic in me. I had spent so long believing I was the reason things were broken. Now I understood that stepping away had not destroyed my family. It had simply stopped me from holding up a structure that was already cracking, under the weight of its own dishonesty. I did not win anything. I did not take revenge. I did not stand on a stage and point fingers. I chose the truth. I chose silence. I chose to stop participating in my own erasure. That choice changed everything. If there is one thing I know now, it is this. Being told you are too much or not enough says nothing about your worth and everything about the limits of the people judging you. Some families are not broken by distance. They are revealed by it. I was never the mistake. I was the mirror they did not want to look into. And walking away did not make me cold or cruel. It made me whole. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this. Silence can be power and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.